The state of Ohio is made possible by the Ohio Educational Telecommunications Network Commission.
Fallout from the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington hits Ohio. One big question on Ohioans' minds, are we safe? One answer, pretty safe, but not 100%.
Unless you're a hermit someplace on a hillside or in a cave, you interact with people, and sometimes that can be a dangerous thing.
The state of Ohio this week has been pretty much like the state of the nation, a state of disbelief, shock, and sadness. I'm Bill Cohen. We focus our program on the huge story, the plane crashes that hit on the East Coast but touched our lives 500 miles away. We'll talk with an airport official about new safety precautions against terrorism at airports, and we'll talk with the Lieutenant Governor about safety in government buildings. But first, Joe Ingles reports on how Ohio officials reacted to the crisis and how just plain folks pitched in to help.
As the day began Tuesday, reporters here in the Ohio Public Radio and TV newsroom were keeping an eye on this, the Associated Press wire machine. It was spewing out information about horrific events as they happened. And the terror could be seen live on television sets throughout the building. As all of this was happening, people in charge of the Statehouse quickly decided to secure the well-known public icon.
There's no business being conducted here in the Statehouse.
Entrance into the Statehouse had been restricted. Guards had been posted at each door.
Joe, I think this is a time for us to be paranoid, not panicky. And when anything of this magnitude, which we've never faced before, happens, people want to be with their loved ones. I can certainly understand that. I think we know what the country felt like on December 7th now. A state of war does exist, as it's been so dramatically thrust upon us today. We need to make sure that we act in a responsible manner to protect both lives and property. And that's what we're doing here today.
All non-essential employees were trying to get out of the parking garage, but that wasn't easy. Downtown Columbus streets were jammed because many other people were trying to leave at the same time. Employees in federal buildings were being sent home too. So were some city employees. People walking down the streets were in a state of disbelief.
A little nervous about things, not just wondering what happened over there, but who's responsible, and then some of the outcomes, whether NASDAQ and the stock market's going to drop now, whether other cities are going to be hit, or just kind of questions about what's going on right now, what we plan on doing about it.
He actually pretty much put it real well. We've been talking about it all morning. We teach over at Columbus Works. We've been working with our students all morning and trying to keep them calm and discussing what is going on. We're all in shock. It's a horrible thing. But we're just trying, in our case, we're trying to help our students deal with it and trying to get a handle on it so they're not
panicking.
Quite as panicked as what we're seeing.
It's kind of unnerving watching all these people trying to leave at the same time without having the information that we need to. So yeah, right now we're just trying to keep things calm and just kind of keep things mellow down until we actually figure out what happens.
The skies over the city became eerily still as the constant stream of jets flying over downtown was replaced with one lone helicopter. Travelers at major airports around the state found themselves stranded as federal authorities ordered an indefinite end to all commercial flights. Meanwhile, leaders in cities throughout Ohio were telling residents of their communities to remain calm.
Our emergency operations center is in full tilt right now. The city of Columbus is taking measures. Let me emphasize that the city of Columbus, there is no indication of any threat against our city or our citizens at this time. And we have been in constant, minute-by-minute communications with the appropriate federal and state authorities to monitor the national situation.
Flags outside the State House were lowered to half-staff, while some state leaders gathered inside to talk about the situation.
This takes us beyond Vietnam. This takes us beyond Korea. This takes us beyond back to World War II, when the closest we came was Pearl Harbor to our domestic shore. This one is right up our tailpipe, and it's touched our friends and neighbors. You talk about body bags coming home. The body bags are here. The reaction is going to be those thousands, and it's reported without any firm numbers, to be far in excess of Pearl Harbor that today has yielded. And I think that this is going to, as was spoken back then, that this day will live in infamy. I think September the 11th, 01 is going to live in infamy as well.
Just an absolutely tragic day for the country. Every citizen, obviously, hearts go out to the families of the victims, and a lot of uncertainty yet about the magnitude of what all this might mean.
For some lawmakers, the attacks reminded them of personal experiences.
It's just something that you can't combat. I mean, they don't wear a different colored uniform. They don't advertise the fact that they're the enemy. And if terrorists were well organized, like apparently this is, there's just really no combating it. And that's the price you pay for a free society.
You're as safe as you can be, and yet we're in a free society, and we take some chances sometimes.
They don't pick on people that are trained to be in combat, but they pick on moms and dads, and it's just when they fight that kind of a war. But I think they'll find that our country will respond with sufficient power to suppress those people that would do these types of things. I think the president will lead this country in a way that we'll track down those terrorists, we'll find out who they are, and we'll take the action necessary to make sure they're never able to do that again. I spent 2 tours of duty in Vietnam plus some other times there, and I know how terrible terrorism can be. I know how it can intimidate. But the one thing about it, with a cool head and a cool mind and a process that says we will punish you, they understand that.
Governor Taft wanted State House reporters gathered inside his office to understand how he felt about the attacks.
There's no question this will change how we live our lives, and particularly it will change how we travel by air. But there may be many other impacts as well in terms of how we move, how we travel. There could be an impact at the national level in other ways as well. Certainly, there's going to be, I'm sure, tremendous investigation by the Congress and by the administration into our security procedures, our intelligence systems, to determine how this could have happened and how we can prevent it from ever occurring again.
Taft told reporters a 70-member Ohio task force trained in search and rescue missions was already helping victims some 500 miles away. And he urged all Ohioans to help by saying prayers for the victims and the rescue workers, but that wasn't his only suggestion.
A few hours ago, I spoke to a special assistant to New York Governor Pataki to offer our assistance. And I want to encourage Ohioans to accept the offer and the request of Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani for donations of blood by calling the Ohio Red Cross at 1-800-GIVE-LIFE to arrange for donation of blood.
A blood bank in central Ohio was packed as people poured in to give the gift of life.
We had 24 on schedule today, and as of right now we've had 137 sign in. And people have had to wait for long periods of time, but they've been absolutely wonderful. And I personally appreciate everyone. I have a relative who works in the Pentagon, and I'm very grateful.
It's the little bit that I can do. I can't do a whole lot. What can I do? You know, I can't be there in New York. I can't be in Washington. But if I can give a little bit of my life to someone else to help in a surgery or something like that, then I think I have helped some.
Something that we can do here in Columbus, Ohio. We didn't have a direct hit by the terrorists, but in a way we did, because they affected our daily routine and what we were able to do and what we may be able to do in the future. So if we can show whoever did this that we can rally together and stave it off, then maybe they'll deter the next group.
2 weeks ago today, I was leaving the Marriott at the World Trade Center, so that could have been me.
When Ohioans woke up Wednesday morning, they realized the terrorist attacks were not a nightmare, they were real. People trying to cope with the tragedy packed the Statehouse atrium, subjecting themselves to security searches to take part in one of the largest memorial services ever held in the building.
As Americans, we live in the most powerful nation on earth. Yet, we remain vulnerable to acts of terror. Terrorists reject our values, our way of life, and the freedoms we enjoy. But we will not be terrorized. We will not submit to fear. We will not forego our freedom.
Oh Lord, please fill our hearts right now and the grieving that we're going through for our great nation. We pray, oh Lord, for those that have gone on with you, but we know that thou art safe in your arms.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
America has always come back. We're the comeback kids. But what we must understand today is that we ought to get strength in one another and in God. We must rise beyond denominations. We must rise along because you belong to that religion and this religion and that religion. We must remember that there's only one God. And if you know who God is, then you shouldn't have time for hang-ups and prejudices and hate. And those people that commandeered that plane and took those planes the other day, they didn't have a real God, because if you have a real God, you got to love everybody. Because we're not nothing but dust, and we're going back to dust.
Ohioans continued to look for ways to cope with the crisis. Thousands took part in a fund drive for the American Red Cross, sponsored by some local radio stations. Organizers said some people driving through the line were giving hundreds of dollars for the cause. And people showed their support in another way. Stores selling flags reported a spike in the number of people wanting to buy Old Glory to show their patriotism. At one point, just hours after the tragedy, Ohioans who looked skyward could see a clear symbol of the nation's resolve: President Bush and his military escorts returning to Washington. Reporting on the state of Ohio, I'm Joe Ingles.
When the sun rose Wednesday morning, this was the aftermath in some Ohio cities. Some gas stations had pretty much run out of gasoline after a frenzied night of panic buying by motorists. Even though most stations kept their prices stable or raised them only a dime, drivers were worried about rumors and reports of oil refineries shutting down, and a few gas stations jacking up prices to $5 a gallon.
Do not panic. There is adequate supply from all information we have there that we're not out of gasoline. Our problem is when you do panic buy, then stations run out of gasoline, and it takes time to get more gasoline to those stations. It's not a lack of product, it's a run on the stations of people who panic, and we're telling people, don't panic. There is gasoline, there is supply. You have no need to rush out and fill up your car.
But haven't some gasoline stations raised their prices dramatically? Reports of $5 a gallon?
They have, and we condemn that. We encourage, if there can be criminal investigations or charges, we would encourage that. We condemn any gouging out there. If you see prices of $2.50, $3, $4, $5, $6 a gallon, do not, I repeat, do not buy gasoline at those service stations. We condemn that. And for the most part, I have to say, they're independent service stations. Company-owned stations have not charged those kind of prices, and as a result have run out of gasoline.
There were rumors, there were reports after the terrorism that for some reason gasoline refineries might shut down. What's the truth about that?
Refineries have not shut down. There have been a number of safety precautions taken at refineries, bulk plants, tankers, ships have been held offshore, but that's a temporary situation. We don't expect any problem with the flow of gasoline. We will have product. We just, again, encourage people not to panic, that there will be product.
The panic buying and isolated examples of sky-high gas prices evaporated after one day. Still, Ohio's Attorney General issued a warning to gas stations: don't be a profiteer during a national crisis.
We have admonished and warned all of the gas suppliers involved that we will be looking at the complaints that come into us about gouging, that gouging is a violation of the law, and it does have specific consequences legally. And we will be looking at that, and we put out an advisory today again to say we take this very seriously. To profiteer at a time like this is unconscionable.
Unconscionable may not sound like a technical legal term, but in this case it could be. Neither the federal nor the state government has the authority to directly regulate gasoline prices, but an Ohio consumer protection law bars retailers from, quote, unconscionable acts. As the week ended, the Attorney General used that law to file civil suits against 4 gasoline stations. They had jacked up their prices to $4, $5, and $6 a gallon. As airports around the state and country sat empty much of this week, the people who manage those facilities were working to make them safer. What changes are they making? And will the new rules be enough to convince passengers that it's safe to fly? Reporter Joe Ingles posed those questions to David Whitaker, a spokesman for the airport in Columbus.
Ticketed passengers and authorized personnel only beyond the security checkpoints. Heretofore, meters and greeters, as we refer to them, or those who are seeing off or looking to pick up customers, were permitted to go down to the gates, and that is no longer permitted. No parking or waiting at the terminal curbs. Drop-off and pickup is permitted, but no dwelling of any length of time. So it's got to be immediate processing as soon as you pull up. No knives of any size beyond the security checkpoint. Again, heretofore there was the pocket knife permission to have a pocket knife with you and bring it on board, but from this point forward, no knives of any shape or size, makeup at all are permitted beyond the security checkpoints. An increase in screening of passengers and baggage at the security checkpoint. I think in addition to the walk-through metal detector, you'll see a dramatic increase in the use of a hand-wand device to double-check for metal on passenger. I think you'll also see an increase in the hand search of carry-on luggage. There's been some discussion about a restriction on carry-on luggage or an elimination of carry-on luggage, and we have not heard any wind of that and are not anticipating that for our passengers here, certainly. And again, we're pretty close to the regulations, and there's no discussion about the elimination of carry-on bags at a local level anyways with our FAA. An increased presence of law enforcement officers in the building. You'll just see more uniformed police officers, and there's also the discussion on a federal level, although we're not directly involved in that, of an increase in federal law enforcement personnel in terminals and airplanes.
Do you think that the flying public will have enough confidence to get on the planes again?
If history is our guide, it was a while after the Persian Gulf War before leisure travel picked up. I would expect that conditions are similar, if not more serious than that, and so that's possible. It's an incredibly safe system, despite Tuesday's events, which are the most dramatic ever. But still, there's reason to have confidence, but yet there's also reason for concern.
Could it happen here? That's always the question people ask far away from the site of a disaster. And it's a tough question to answer. Still, Ohioans want to know, could they be targets as they visit a state government office building or work in a private company's skyscraper? And what are state officials considering to make our lives safer? We posed those questions to the director of the Ohio Department of Public Safety, who just happens to be Ohio's Lieutenant Governor, Maureen O'Connor.
I think it's important for Ohioans to feel secure here in the state of Ohio, and I think it's important for them to realize what the state government is doing in response to this act of terrorism, both in New York and Washington. As you've probably noticed around the State House, there's been a heightened presence of the Ohio State Highway Patrol here at the State House and in all state buildings in the state of Ohio. We have increased security, and that security will continue. We don't have a cutoff date We'll regroup and take a look at it as time progresses, but I think that people should be aware that the Ohio State Highway Patrol, again, has increased the level of security.
Is it likely that average citizens in the future, when they go to the State House or some other government office building, that they're going to have to be searched or go through a metal detector?
I'm not sure what the response will be. I think that there will be a response, and I can take a look. I think we will have to group and talk to experts in that field about what would be an appropriate response. There is, obviously going to be a need for heightened security at airports, and how that then translates to heightened security in all public buildings, not only state buildings, because if you take a look at it, the World Trade Center were not state buildings, they weren't government buildings, but they were symbols. And if there's other buildings here in the state of Ohio or across the country, I'm sure that security will be re-examined and then altered in a way to respond.
So are you urging private businesses that have headquarters in big office towers, are you urging them to beef up their security too?
I think it's important to use common sense and heightened awareness to start with. And it may very well come to the situation where there are recommendations made. That hasn't been determined yet, but there may very well be recommendations made about how you not only heighten your awareness, but you increase your security. I think one thing that this act of terrorism has proven is that whether it be a government building or whether it is a non-public building, we're vulnerable.
Some people may say that no matter how much you beef up security, no one can be 100% safe. Would you agree with that?
I think that's true. I think that's true. But I think that there's common sense things that you can do. There's common sense things that the government will take a look at, and the state of Ohio also. And then that will translate to the necessary precautions being taken.
Does that leave Ohioans then with a sense that they're not really totally safe?
I don't think there's anybody that's totally safe from any disaster that could befall you as a citizen of the world. I think that you look at car accidents, you look at natural disasters, you look at other man-made disasters, and unless you're a hermit someplace on a hillside or in a cave, you interact with people, and sometimes that can be a dangerous thing.
In New York and Washington this week, it was a matter of life and death for thousands of people. In Ohio, it was a matter of life and death for one man, convicted murderer John Byrd. He had been scheduled to be executed Wednesday morning, but an 11th-hour order from a federal appeals court put off the execution. So 9 judges can consider Byrd's claim that he was not the robber who stabbed a convenience store clerk to death in 1983. For Ohio's Attorney General, the latest delay was just another example of how death row inmates get too many appeals.
When the public thinks of the death penalty, I mean, I think it's common knowledge that the death penalty is not a deterrent of crime in this nation because there is such a long time between the actual trial and the carrying out of the sentence. And this environment of delay that we have in Ohio, when we see cases linger in the system like John Byrd's has for 18 years, and when we have frivolous claims come up at the end just to effect more delay, I think you see people scratching their heads. They're wondering what's going on here. Why are we sitting around? This man is guilty. The courts have said he's guilty. He's exhausted all of his guaranteed appeals, and the courts have upheld his sentence. And they still see this delay, and it leaves people incredulous as to what's up with the system? Why is the system working this way?
Opponents of capital punishment breathed a sigh of relief, and they defended Byrd's public defender attorneys for doing everything they can to put off his date with death.
Delay, if the system, I don't use the word delay. I think we've got to realize that the death penalty is the ultimate competition, where it's not, our system doesn't often get to the truth as much as it gets to who has the strongest prosecutors versus defense, and whoever wins, one of the client's going to die if the defenders lose. And so it's up to a defender to do everything that is legally allowed to save someone's life. You would just expect that, and if you don't, those of us that are we're frustrated with it, but that's our system. So let's get rid of the system in favor of justice that is indeed swifter, firm, and tough. Life in prison without parole.
Death penalty opponents won a double victory this week. The U.S. Supreme Court voted not to overturn the stay issued by the appeals court. So now it appears that the earliest John Byrd can be executed is October 8th. He has said he wants to put his executioners through as much stress as possible, and that's why he's chosen to be killed in the electric chair instead of by a lethal injection. If that electrocution happens, it would be the first use of Ohio's electric chair since 1963. You can contact the Statehouse Bureau by emailing us at statenews@wviz.org. And that is the state of Ohio. Most weeks our lives blur as they fade into the past, but this week has been different. It will remain in people's memories for decades here in the state of Ohio.
The State of Ohio is made possible by the Ohio Educational Telecommunications Network Commission.